April 10, 1912. The world cheered for the greatest ship ever built. They called it unsinkable. But only 4 nights later, screams would replace music, and dreams would drown in the cold Atlantic. This is the doom of Titanic. On the morning of April 10, 1912, the port of Southampton in England was alive with noise and excitement. People from all walks of life gathered at the docks to witness a sight that would be remembered forever. Before their eyes stood the Titanic, the largest and most luxurious ship ever built. It was not just a ship. It was a floating palace, a wonder of human skill and pride. Men, women, and children gazed in amazement, pointing at its great size, its shining decks, and its towering funnels. The Titanic looked powerful, safe, and perfect. No one could imagine that this very ship, praised as unsinkable, would soon meet a fate that shocked the whole world. The Titanic's departure was more than just a journey. For many, it was the start of a dream. Some rich passengers dressed in fine clothes, carrying their expensive luggage, walked proudly toward the ship. They believed the Titanic was the most comfortable way to cross the Atlantic Ocean. Wealthy businessmen, nobles, and even celebrities had booked first-class rooms. Their cabins were decorated like royal homes, with soft carpets, golden lamps, and private dining rooms. For the upper class, Titanic was not only a ship. It was a statement of success, power, and modern progress. While the rich enjoyed luxury, poor families also rushed to the Titanic, but their hopes were very different. Many of them were immigrants, people who wanted to leave behind poverty in Europe and start a new life in America. They carried little with them, only a few bags, some food, and their dreams. For them, the Titanic was a ship of hope. It was a chance to escape hunger, to find work, and to give their children a better future. They did not care about chandeliers or fine dining. For them, the Titanic was a promise. The contrast between the rich and the poor was sharp, but for now, everyone shared the same feeling, excitement. As the clock moved closer to noon, crew members prepared the ship for departure. Steam rose from the funnels, and a loud horn shook the air, announcing that the Titanic was ready to leave. Families hugged and waved goodbye, not knowing it would be the last time they would ever see their loved ones. The Titanic slowly moved from the dock, pulled by smaller tugboats, and then began to glide into the open sea. The people on the shore cheered and clapped. Cameras clicked, capturing the proud faces of passengers standing on the decks. It was a moment of pride for Britain and for the world. The Titanic was called a miracle of modern engineering. Newspapers had praised it for weeks, calling it the ship of dreams. The builders, the owners, and even the captain believed it could never sink. With 16 watertight compartments, double bottoms, and the most advanced safety design of the time, it was seen as unstoppable. This belief was so strong that people joked about it. Some said, "Not even God himself could sink this ship." But those words, spoken with pride, would soon turn into bitter irony. On board, life quickly began to show 2 different worlds. In the first-class dining rooms, passengers enjoyed music, rich food, and laughter. In second class, travelers were comfortable, happy to be part of such a grand ship. In third class, families shared small cabins and simple meals, but their hearts were full of joy because they were finally on their way to America. Everywhere, people were smiling, hopeful, and proud to be part of this historic voyage. But behind the happiness, there were also tiny signs that fate was quietly writing a darker story. Some dock workers whispered about the Titanic's size, saying it was too big to be safe. A few passengers spoke of uneasy feelings, though they could not explain why. Even nature seemed strange. The air was cold, the waters of the Atlantic colder than usual. But these thoughts were small, drowned out by the laughter of children, the music of violins, and the sound of engines pushing the Titanic forward. The ship's captain, Edward Smith, was a man of great respect. He had guided many ships safely across the Atlantic, and passengers trusted him completely. Smith himself believed the Titanic was his greatest honor, the peak of his career. He walked the decks with calm confidence, greeting passengers, smiling, and making everyone feel secure. Few could guess that this would be his final voyage. As the Titanic sailed into the evening, the sun set behind it, painting the sky with orange and gold. The ship's lights shone brightly, making it look like a floating city on the sea. People leaned on the rails, watching the waves, dreaming about the future. Some planned business in New York. Others dreamed of new homes, new jobs, and new beginnings. For everyone, the Titanic carried not only their bodies but also their hopes. And yet, in the darkness of the ocean ahead, danger waited silently. The great ship moved forward, confident and strong, but destiny had already chosen a different ending. No one could see it. No one could stop it. The Titanic was sailing toward history, toward a night that would be remembered for generations. And so, the first day of Titanic's journey ended with joy, pride, and dreams. But only a few nights later, all of it would be swallowed by fear, by icy waters, and by the doom that no one on that bright April morning had ever imagined. When the Titanic began its first days at sea, life on board was full of wonder, excitement, and discovery. The passengers who had stepped on this ship of dreams now started to explore it, and they quickly realized that it was unlike any vessel they had ever seen before. For the rich in first class, every corner spoke of luxury and pride. Their rooms were as grand as hotels, with golden lamps, thick carpets, and soft beds. The dining halls glowed with shining chandeliers, where men in fine suits and women in elegant dresses gathered for dinners filled with laughter and music. Every meal was a royal feast with the best food, and every night felt like a celebration of wealth and comfort. For the second-class passengers, life was also a pleasant surprise. Their cabins were simpler, but still far better than what most had known before. They enjoyed clean rooms, good meals, and the excitement of traveling on the world's most famous ship. Many teachers, merchants, and families filled the second-class decks, proud that they were part of history. They could walk along the decks, breathe the fresh sea air, and dream about the future that awaited them in America. In third class, things were different, yet still filled with happiness. Families with little money stayed in small cabins, often shared with others. The food was simple, the space was tight, but their spirits were strong. For many, this was the first time they had seen such a big ship, and the journey itself felt like an adventure. They sang songs, played music, and told stories to pass the time. The laughter of children echoed in the lower decks, their tiny voices filled with excitement about the new world they were sailing toward. The Titanic itself was more than a ship. It was a floating city. It had a swimming pool, a gymnasium, a reading room, smoking rooms, and even a grand staircase that left passengers in awe. People marveled at the elevators, something rare and modern at the time. They strolled through long corridors that seemed endless, often forgetting they were on water at all. Every part of the Titanic spoke of human achievement, of pride in progress and technology. The crew worked hard to keep everything running smoothly. Hundreds of men and women in uniforms moved quickly through the ship, serving meals, cleaning cabins, and keeping passengers safe. Below the shining decks, deep in the belly of the ship, stokers worked in blistering heat, shoveling coal into huge furnaces that kept the Titanic alive. Their work was invisible to most passengers, but it was their sweat and labor that made the Titanic move forward across the Atlantic. On the surface, the ship looked calm and perfect, but inside, it was powered by endless effort. As the days passed, friendships began to form. Children played together on the decks, men smoked cigars and discussed business, women admired each other's gowns and spoke of their lives. Passengers from different countries met and shared stories. The Titanic was not just a ship but a meeting place of cultures, dreams, and human hopes. People spoke about the future with glowing eyes. Some planned to build new businesses in America, others dreamed of buying land, and many poor families wished for nothing more than steady work and a roof over their heads. The ocean stretched endlessly around them, but on board the Titanic, life was busy, bright, and safe. In the evenings, the ship came alive with music. Bands played violins and pianos, filling the air with joyful tunes. In the first-class lounges, couples danced under soft lights, their laughter mixing with the music. In third class, passengers played their own instruments, singing songs from their homelands. The sound of music traveled through the decks, uniting people in ways they did not yet understand. Every night, the ship moved smoothly across the dark sea, its lights shining like stars on the water. From the decks, Passengers gazed out at the ocean, marveling at its beauty and power. The sea was calm, the air was cold, and the waves were gentle. It seemed as if nature itself respected the Titanic, allowing it to pass without challenge. But in this peace lay hidden danger. Unknown to the passengers, the waters they sailed toward were filled with icebergs. Warnings had been sent by other ships, yet many aboard the Titanic never knew of them. The belief in the ship's strength was so great that most people dismissed the thought of risk. To them, the Titanic was a fortress. They laughed at fear, trusting the steel walls and modern design that promised safety. The captain walked the decks with calm dignity. Edward Smith was admired by passengers and crew alike. To some, he looked like a guardian, a man who had guided countless voyages across the Atlantic. He seemed untouchable, confident, and proud of the great ship under his command. He reassured the passengers with his presence alone. But even he could not see what lay ahead in the frozen waters. As day turned into night, the stars above the Titanic shone brighter than most had ever seen. The clear skies gave travelers a sense of wonder, as if the universe itself was watching them. Lovers whispered promises on the decks, parents tucked their children into bed, and crew members kept steady watch. To everyone, life on board felt perfect, almost too perfect. No one could believe that in only a few nights, this same ship would be filled not with music, but with screams. The Titanic was more than a ship. It was a dream, a floating symbol of human pride. But even the brightest dream can carry a shadow. In the laughter, in the music, and in the comfort of those nights at sea, no one could hear the quiet footsteps of fate drawing closer. And so, the days of happiness sailed on, blind to the icy wall that waited in the darkness. As the Titanic sailed deeper into the Atlantic, the days seemed calm and perfect. Passengers enjoyed the sunshine on the open decks, the cold sea breeze on their faces, and the endless blue horizon. At night, the ship glided smoothly under skies filled with stars so bright that some said it felt like sailing through a dream. Everything appeared safe, but hidden beneath this calm beauty, small warnings began to appear, whispers of danger that few paid attention to. Other ships traveling in the same waters sent messages about icebergs drifting in the North Atlantic. The Titanic's wireless operators received these warnings, written clearly for the bridge. Yet, with so many messages about business and passengers, some warnings were delayed, some ignored, and some pushed aside. The Titanic was believed to be the strongest ship ever built. Why worry about ice when the world called her unsinkable? Still, the signs were there. On April 13, reports of heavy ice reached the Titanic. The crew noted them but did not slow the ship. On April 14, more warnings came, clear and urgent: ice ahead, beware. Even then, the Titanic kept its speed. Captain Edward Smith believed in his ship. He wanted to reach New York on time, perhaps even earlier, to impress the world with the Titanic's power. For the passengers, life continued in joy. They had no idea of the messages being received in the wireless room. On that Sunday, April 14, the weather was strangely calm. The ocean was flat like glass, with no waves at all. Sailors knew that calm seas could be dangerous, because without waves breaking against the ice, spotting icebergs became harder. Yet the passengers admired the peaceful water, thinking it was a sign of good luck. As night approached, the air grew colder than before. Breath turned into mist in the freezing air, and the decks grew quiet as most people went inside. The sea remained calm, the stars brighter than ever, and the darkness deeper than anyone had known. It was a night both beautiful and deadly, though no one realized it yet. At the wireless room, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, the two operators, were busy with a flood of passenger messages. Wealthy travelers wanted to send telegrams to friends and family, telling them of their wonderful journey. In the middle of this, more iceberg warnings arrived from nearby ships, but Phillips grew annoyed. He snapped at one message from the Californian, telling them to keep the line clear. He was under pressure, and the warnings felt like interruptions rather than urgent danger. Fate was sending signs, but they went unheard. On the bridge, the lookouts climbed into their small nest high on the mast. They carried no binoculars that night, only their eyes against the dark. The sea ahead looked empty, calm, and endless. Yet they felt uneasy, for the air was so still, and the horizon so black, that it was hard to see where the ocean ended and the sky began. Below deck, in first class, laughter and music continued. Passengers enjoyed fine dinners, spoke of politics and business, and admired the ship's elegance. The band played soft tunes, and glasses of wine sparkled under golden light. In second class, families read books, talked quietly, and played cards. In third class, passengers danced and sang, clapping to folk songs from their homelands. All across the ship, people enjoyed life without a thought of danger. But the Titanic was rushing forward at nearly full speed, almost 22 knots, into waters filled with floating ice. The officers on duty knew about the warnings, but the ship did not slow. The belief in her strength was too great. The thought that she could sink was unthinkable. Captain Smith visited the bridge that evening, spoke briefly with his officers, and then retired to his cabin. He left orders to keep watch and maintain course. The night grew colder, the stars shone brighter, and the silence of the ocean became almost frightening. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath. Somewhere out there, silent giants of ice floated, invisible in the dark, waiting. At 9:40 p.m., another urgent warning arrived from the Mesaba, reporting a large field of ice directly in the Titanic's path. This message never reached the bridge. It was logged but not delivered. At 10:30, the Californian reported it had stopped for the night, surrounded by dangerous ice. Again, the Titanic steamed ahead. The passengers slept, danced, and dreamed, while destiny drew closer with every passing mile. Up in the crow's nest, lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee shivered in the freezing air. Their eyes scanned the horizon, but without binoculars, spotting danger was nearly impossible. They could only hope to see shadows against the starlight. Time ticked slowly toward midnight. Down below, the great engines throbbed, pushing the ship forward, while stokers worked endlessly in heat and sweat. Above, the decks were quiet now, the laughter fading, only the sound of the sea against the hull. It was almost too calm, too perfect, as if the world was preparing for something terrible. The Titanic, mighty and proud, moved forward into the darkness, carrying more than 2,000 souls, unaware of how close they were to disaster. Every warning had been given. Every sign was clear. But pride, confidence, and human error blinded them. The ship of dreams was sailing into the heart of danger, faster and faster, with no idea that within the next hour, history itself would change forever. The night of April 14, 1912, was one of the calmest nights the Atlantic had ever seen. The sky was clear, filled with countless stars, and the sea was flat like a mirror. The Titanic moved forward at great speed, cutting through the cold water with confidence. Passengers had gone to their cabins after a long day of music, games, and conversation. Some were still awake in the lounges, talking quietly or enjoying the last notes of the band's music. But most of the ship slept peacefully, unaware that destiny was only minutes away. At 11:40 p.m., in the crow's nest, lookout Frederick Fleet suddenly spotted something in the distance. At first, it looked like a shadow, darker than the night itself. As the ship moved closer, the shape became clearer. It was a massive iceberg, rising out of the water like a silent mountain of ice. Fleet rang the warning bell 3 times and shouted down to the bridge, "Iceberg right ahead." The officers on duty reacted instantly. First Officer William Murdoch gave the order to turn the wheel hard to port and to reverse the engines. The ship began to turn, but the Titanic was too huge, too fast, and too close. Just moments later, the iceberg scraped along the starboard side of the ship with a terrible grinding sound. To many sleeping passengers, it felt like a soft vibration, nothing alarming. But deep inside the hull, steel plates buckled, rivets popped, and cold water rushed in. The iceberg had cut through the Titanic's side, opening it to the sea. On the bridge, the officers stood in shock. Murdoch and the others knew at once that the ship was badly hurt. The Titanic had been built with watertight compartments, but the iceberg had torn open too many. 5 compartments filled with water within minutes. The ship had been designed to stay afloat with 4 compartments flooded, but 5 meant doom. Down below, in the boiler rooms, men felt the rush of freezing water. Stokers dropped their shovels, running for their lives as the sea poured in. Some never escaped, trapped by the sudden flood. On the decks above, passengers began to wake up, confused by the sudden stop of the engines. They opened doors and stepped into the cold night air, asking what had happened. Crew members tried to calm them, telling them it was nothing serious. But inside, Captain Edward Smith now stood on the bridge, his face pale. After inspecting the damage with the ship's builder, Thomas Andrews, he received the grim truth. The Titanic would sink. Not immediately, but within a few hours, the greatest ship in the world would be at the bottom of the ocean. Smith's heart must have sunk with those words, but he did not show fear. He gave his orders firmly: prepare the lifeboats, wake the passengers, and send out distress signals. Across the ship, the crew began to move quickly, though many still did not realize the full danger. The wireless operators tapped out urgent calls for help, repeating over and over, "Come at once. We have struck an iceberg." The nearest ship, the Californian, did not answer. Another ship, the Carpathia, replied, but it was more than 3 hours away. Time was slipping away like water through fingers. Above deck, lifeboats were uncovered, but confusion soon followed. The Titanic carried more than 2,000 people, but there were only enough lifeboats for about half. Worse still, the crew had never practiced a full evacuation, and many did not know the correct procedures. Some officers hesitated, unsure whether to load the boats fully. As a result, the first lifeboats lowered carried only a handful of passengers, while hundreds remained waiting on deck. At first, many passengers did not even want to leave. They looked at the lifeboats swinging above the calm sea and laughed at the idea that the mighty Titanic could sink. They believed it was safer to stay on board than to sit in a small boat in the freezing ocean. Some women refused to go without their husbands, and some men stepped back, unwilling to take places meant for women and children. The rule was clear: women and children first. In first class, wealthy families stood wrapped in furs, waiting as their lifeboats were lowered half empty. In third class, chaos spread as families struggled to find their way through locked gates and confusing passageways. Panic grew when the truth became clear: the Titanic was dying. Water poured in faster, the bow sinking lower and lower. The tilt of the ship became sharper, and passengers began to lose their balance. Dishes fell from tables, and furniture slid across cabins. The music of the band continued to play, trying to keep spirits calm, but fear could not be hidden anymore. Mothers cried for their children, men shouted orders, and the cold wind carried the sounds of terror across the dark sea. At 1:30 a.m., the lifeboats were nearly gone. Hundreds still stood on the decks, watching in despair. The bow of the Titanic dipped deep into the ocean, while the stern lifted high into the air. The lights flickered, then went out, leaving only the stars and the pale glow of the iceberg field around them. In the darkness, the cries of thousands filled the air. Some jumped into the sea, hoping to swim to safety, only to be claimed by the freezing water within minutes. Others clung to railings, praying for a miracle. The great ship groaned under its own weight, metal tearing, decks breaking. And then, in a final moment of terror, the Titanic split apart, sending both ends crashing into the black water. More than 1,500 souls were now fighting for life in the icy sea, while the lifeboats, half full, floated nearby. The unsinkable ship was gone. The dream had turned into a nightmare, and history had just witnessed one of the greatest tragedies ever to strike the sea. The Titanic now lay broken in the freezing Atlantic, swallowed by darkness and icy waves. The mighty ship that had once been called unsinkable was gone, and more than 1,500 souls were left fighting for life in water colder than ice. The lifeboats, scattered across the dark sea, carried only a fraction of the passengers. Many seats were still empty because earlier they had been lowered half full, and now those empty spaces felt like cruel shadows of wasted chances. Inside the boats, people sat in stunned silence, too shocked to speak. They watched as the ship's last lights disappeared beneath the ocean, leaving only cries of terror and the endless night. The sound of so many voices screaming for help was unbearable. Mothers called out for their children, husbands shouted for their wives, and the sea echoed with desperate pleas. But the lifeboats dared not return to pick up more people, for fear that those in the water would overwhelm them and tip them over. So the boats drifted away slowly, carrying the lucky few, while the majority struggled against certain death in the freezing water. The human heart can only survive a few minutes in such cold. One by one, the voices began to fade. Strong men who had once laughed on the decks now floated silently. Women who had dreamed of a new life sank beneath the waves. Children's cries grew faint until silence replaced them. In less than an hour, most of those in the water were gone. Only the stars above bore witness to this tragedy, shining coldly over the vast emptiness where the ship of dreams had vanished. On board the lifeboats, passengers sat in horror, unable to look away. Some wept, some prayed, and others simply stared at the black water, too numb to feel. The band that had once played cheerful music was gone. The laughter that had filled the grand dining halls was gone. What remained was sorrow, silence, and fear. Captain Edward Smith went down with his ship, his final voyage ending in the depths of the ocean. Many of his crew stayed at their posts until the end, guiding passengers, lowering boats, and helping as many as they could. They too joined the ship in its grave, remembered for their bravery. Even in the last moments, stories of courage were written. Some men gave up their seats so that women and children could live. Some parents placed their children in lifeboats, then stepped back with tears in their eyes, knowing they would never see them again. The ship that had been built as a symbol of pride became instead a stage where both human selfishness and human sacrifice were revealed. As the night passed, the survivors shivered in the small boats. The cold pierced their skin, their clothes frozen stiff, their bodies weak. The dark sea stretched endlessly around them, and they feared no help would ever come. They looked toward the horizon, praying for the light of another ship. Hours dragged on like years, and every sound of the ocean felt like a reminder of death. Yet far away, one ship had heard their cries for help. The Carpathia, sailing through the icy waters at full speed, was racing toward the Titanic's last position. Captain Rostron and his crew did everything they could to reach the survivors quickly. They pushed through dangerous ice fields, guided only by hope and determination. Finally, just before dawn, the first lifeboats saw a faint light on the horizon. Hope returned to hearts that had nearly given up. The Carpathia arrived at the scene and began pulling survivors aboard. One by one, cold, trembling passengers climbed onto its decks. Some collapsed in relief, others wept for the loved ones they had lost. Out of more than 2,000 people who had boarded the Titanic, only about 700 remained alive. The rest now rested forever in the icy grave of the Atlantic. When the survivors reached New York, the world learned the terrible truth. Newspapers across the globe carried the shocking headlines: Titanic sunk on her first voyage, thousands lost. Crowds gathered at docks, waiting for family members who would never return. The world mourned together, realizing that even the greatest creations of man could fall in a single night. The Titanic became more than just a shipwreck. It became a lesson written in sorrow. It showed the danger of human pride, the limits of technology, and the cost of ignoring warnings. 4 years to come, the story of the Titanic was told again and again, not only as a tale of tragedy but also of courage, sacrifice, and the fragile nature of life. The icy waters of April 1912 took away the Titanic, but they could not erase the memory. Even today, more than a century later, people remember the ship that was called unsinkable and the night when dreams turned to doom. The image of a proud ship sinking into darkness remains carved into history, reminding the world that no matter how strong humans believe themselves to be, nature always has the final word. The Titanic's doom was not only the end of a voyage. It was the birth of a story that would live forever, a story of hope, pride, tragedy, and the eternal strength of human memory.